will be given by Father Ole with St. Pius Catholic Church and Rectory. Father, if you would like to come forward, please. And everyone, if you so choose, please stand with me and remain standing for the pledge to our nation's flag.
God of justice and mercy, thank you for the gift of life and the opportunity to serve the people of our city. Help us to act with character and conviction. Help us to listen with understanding and goodwill. Help us to speak with charity and restraint. Give us a spirit of service. Remind us that we are stewards of your authority. Guide us to be the leaders your people need. Help us to treat all persons, no matter how weak or poor, with the reverence your creation deserves. Jesus, during your ministry on earth, you showed your power and caring by healing the people of all ages, the stations of life from physical and mental and spiritual ailments. Be present now to people who need your loving touch because of COVID-19. May they feel your power of healing through the care of doctors and nurses. And finally, Father, renew us with the strength of your presence, the joy of helping to build a community worthy of the human person. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the pledge to our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Father. May we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Ames.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Pate. Councilmember Neal.
Present.
Councilmember Getz.
Present.
Councilmember Felshaw.
Present.
Councilmember Samuel. And Councilmember Mouton.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do not have any presentations or proclamations today. So with that said, I will move right into public comment. Now would be the time for any citizen who wishes to speak. If you would like to make comment today on scheduled agenda items 4 through 7 or the consent agenda, the time to do so is now. If you haven't already done so, please fill out the green slip that the officer will give you, and the city clerk will call your name. We'd appreciate if you keep your comments to 3 minutes. The green light comes on when you approach the podium, and the red light comes on when your time is up. Items number 1 through 3 have already been heard in a joint public hearing of the Planning Commission and the City Council, so they're not available for comment. That public hearing already took place. So right now is for 4 through 7 or the consent agenda. If you're here to speak on any other item, I will open up the microphone at the end of the meeting for that purpose.
I don't have any, Mayor,
Okay, nobody wants to speak on 4 through 7 or consent?
according to Haley. No, ma'am.
Okay, all right.
A lot of people still filling them out.
They're still filling them out?
Yes, ma'am.
So do we want to give them a minute? Would you see, Officer, would you see if they're going to want to speak on one of these items before I get started? Just ask them. Because I saw a lot of people coming in.
No one consent.
I'm sorry?
No one on the consent agenda.
But no one on 4 through 7 either?
I'll say you. Oh, here's 1-6.
Okay.
I have 2.
Cornelius Williams Jr.'s Glen Willow Drive, Beaumont, Texas, item number 6. I'm sorry?
For
Rakita's first for number 6. They probably already got her outside. Do you still have someone?
Which
in-
one?
Oh, okay.
Oh, no.
she's the first.
Oh, yeah, I should put this in
We apologize. It's kind of hard
I'm
when you're
sorry,
not
who was
looking at
it?
each other.
order. Rakita Harper, Phelan Boulevard, Beaumont, Texas, item number 6.
Good morning.
Morning.
Is it afternoon?
Afternoon.
It's afternoon.
You're right.
I want to read a passage from the Confederate Constitution. It says, "The Confederate States may acquire new territory, and Congress shall have power to legislate and provide governments for the inhabitants of all territory belonging to the Confederate States, lying without the limits of the several states, and may permit them at such times and in such a manner as it may by law provide, to form states to be admitted to the Confederacy. In all such territory, the institution of Negro slavery, as it now exists in the Confederate States, shall be recognized and protected by Congress and by the territorial government." These words, you all, were written very boldly and matter-of-factly. The Confederate States Constitution clearly lays out that a large part of what they considered rights had a lot to do with owning people who look like me. Interestingly, many of the Confederate monuments were put in place during the Jim Crow era, too, another era that was enacted to depict the supremacy, if you will, of the white people over the black people or people of color. And let me just say that those were ugly times. The oppressor's mentality has been, unfortunately, passed down from generation to generation, because today, 155 years later, there's still this idea that white is better than black. So racism is still alive today. But you know what else was passed down from generation to generation is a victimized mentality. And both of these mentalities, when they cohabitate, they create a hostile environment. And my question to everyone here is, where are the victors? They do exist. There are many white people here today who look at this statue or anything that promotes or perpetuates the enslavement of black people. They look at it with disgust. And there are many black people who abhor the idea that white people in 2020 are enemies because of something that happened in the past. And I would go on record to say that we are victors. When we see America through the lens of a victor, we see a country that has progressed greatly. Yes, we have wounds and scars from sins past, and we are haunted by our sins on a daily basis. But what victors do is they stand in the face of injustice and say no more. It is a personal choice. I believe that Mr. Getz proposed a very compromising and unifying proposal to change the words on the statue at Wise Park, but my personal opinion on the matter of whether it needs to come down or not really is not as effective as the aftermath of what happens. If we retain the statue, if we remove the statue, will Beaumont still be a comfortably segregated city? I believe that there are more issues that we need to be discussing today. I believe that there are more important issues. There are black people hurting and offended and afraid, and rightfully so. But
Are you almost finished?
yes.
Okay.
The last thing I was going to say was that the statue, in my opinion, is the smallest issue facing Beaumont citizens today. We should be working on school zoning. We should be taking advantage of opportunity zones that our current administration has put in place to empower minority communities and provide jobs. And we need to work towards unity in this city, and I think that starts with the religious leaders in the city. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate it.
Cornelius Williams Jr., Glen Meadow Drive, Beaumont, Texas, item number 6.
How long must the people suffer the indignities of racism? If something offends my brother, something offends my sister, then it offends me. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. My name is Cornelius Darius Williams, Jr. I am a father, I am a husband, I am a brother, I am a cousin, I am a nephew, and I am a proud African American who is a citizen of Beaumont, Texas. I must begin by thanking Councilman Felchaw and Councilman Samuel for having the temerity and understanding to bring this item before us all. To begin, we must dismiss this lost cause fallacy that the South was about Southern and states' rights. In the third paragraph from February 2nd of 1861 in the Articles of Secession, it specifically spoke about the supremacy of white people and the servitude, the involuntary servitude of blacks as slaves. That was the reason. This fallacy that it is about heritage and not hate is, again, this is the lost cause philosophy that took hold 50 years after the Civil War. There is a constant reminder of the historical second-class citizenship of our African American community as embodied in the statute and plaque that exists in Weiss Park. Imagine a statute and plaque commemorating brave Germans that gave their lives in the epic battle of World War II, and a picture and the statues in Warsaw, Poland, or in Skokie, Illinois. This is how ludicrous the statute and plaque in a public park registers, not only in my mind, but in the mind of good and caring people. All of you are aware that most of the Confederate monuments were built in periods of radical conflict. When Jim Crow laws were being introduced late in the 19th century and the start of the 20th century, this is the history of our Confederate statute that sits in Weiss Park. Members of council, we cannot accept racism in any form because it will inevitably metastasize. Remove these offensive and degrading monuments to racism. Please be on the right side of history. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
I'm Teresa Gore, 535 Parson Drive, Beaumont, Texas. Item number 6.
I'm going to take this off so you guys can hear me more clearly. My name is Teresa Gore. I live at 535 Parson Drive, Beaumont, Texas, 77706. And the reason why I'm here is because of the Confederate statue, obviously. While I don't have an issue with most statues in general, anything that is supportive of the Confederacy, I do see there being a problem with. And the reason why is because a lot of the statues were erected, as everyone has said before, long after the end of the Civil War, and it was done to promote basically the Jim Crow laws and putting basically African Americans in their place. Our statue specifically was erected in 1912 in Keith Park. The location of Keith Park is actually where the City Hall and Auditorium that are now known as Julie Rogers Theater are listed today. When you look at the actual Sanborn fire maps, you can see that that's where the original location was. It wasn't, in Weiss Park to begin with. It was right there in the middle where people will have seen it each and every single day. When it was erected, there were already 644 monuments to the Confederacy, according to a tally by the United Daughters of the Confederacy published in the Confederate Veteran Newsletter of that same year. And the United Daughters of Confederacy and the United Confederate Veterans conducted a very effective propaganda campaign, basically, to romanticize the Civil War with numerous monuments 47 years after the end of the Civil War. They also managed to influence education of children with the Children's Confederacy Catechism and the pamphlet called the Measuring Rod for Textbooks, with guidelines for rejecting books that call for the Confederate soldier, that called the Confederate soldier a traitor, rebel, or said that the South fought to hold her slaves, etc. basically the UDC managed to rewrite history. Removing the monument would do nothing more than actually undo what they've already done. There's actually statements by the National Trust that supports the removal of the Confederate statues because they were to serve as a celebration of the lost cause mythology. And it states very clearly that to many African Americans, they continue to serve as a constant and painful reminder that racism is embedded in American society. And the National Trust supports their removal from public spaces where they continue to serve the purposes for which many were built, to glorify, promote, and reinforce white supremacy overtly or implicitly. Everyone knows that, Texas was on the side of the Confederacy. There were 70,000 Confederate soldiers from Texas. What people don't usually know about is that there were 2,000 Union soldiers that fought from Texas. There are no statues to them. There's only one statue to the Union soldiers in all of Texas. There are 26 to Confederate soldiers. So you can't really have one without one to the other one. Now, I think the monument that's being passed is an effective use of a statue because it is a historical point. The one in downtown Beaumont is not. It was basically just sit there to be nothing more than a reminder, and a negative one at that. So,
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate you coming today.
Oliver Sprout, 2675 Blanchette Street, Beaumont, Texas. Item number 6.
Good afternoon.
Yes, sir.
How are you? Councilman? Mayor, Councilman, in the early 20th century, the Ku Klux Klan, the Daughters of the Confederacy, and other named and nameless individuals financed the erection of the Confederate monuments across America. The monument in our city was erected in 1912. It depicts a Confederate soldier in battle uniform with saber and musket. Its inscription depicts deeds of valor, indeed, killing, enslaving, torture, and rape of black people. As Confederate soldiers, they committed treason against the United States. They led our nation into its most painful and bloody internal war to preserve the institution of slavery. They were not patriots and should not be afforded to be honored in sacred spaces in our city or in our country. That's why we don't see statues of Benedict Arnold today. The continued presence of such statues in our cities and in our country are an affront not only to black Americans, but to the ideals that we as a nation proclaim, that we are a place of liberty and justice for all. And you're right, Mr. Getz. You can't change history, but you need not praise and honor it. For those that argue that the Martin Luther King statue should be removed if the Confederate statue is removed, I beg to differ. All Martin Luther King wanted was to be a man equal to any other man, whereas the Confederate soldier gave up his life and died to enslave other men based on color alone. I ask that you remove the monument. I spoke to Mr. Felshaw about that the other day. Having grown up here, that's right across from where the Sears and Roebuck was. And having gone there as a child, my father showed it to me and explained it to me, and I explained it to him. Members of our community expect that, large members. We supported you, and we expect that you'll do the right thing and stand on the right side of history regarding the removal of the monument. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you coming today.
Christopher Matthews, 3875 North Major, Beaumont, Texas. Item number 6.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council. I wanted to speak on this issue, and first of all, I want to thank Councilman Samuels and Councilman Felshaw for bringing this up. I believe that it is the right time in history to do this. It should have been done. It's the right gesture towards racial reconciliation here in Beaumont, It is an idol. Let's not make a mistake about that. That's what it is. It's an idol. Okay? And I just want to read something for y'all real quick. And it kind of surprised me doing my homework. This is a quote from Robert E. Lee, and this is after the Civil War. And he says, "I think it wisest not to keep open the sores of war, but to follow the example of those nations who endeavored to obliterate the marks of civil strife and to commit to oblivion the feelings it engendered." So, for the record, let's keep it straight. Robert E. Lee didn't care about black folks. He didn't care about slaves. But what he was speaking of was reconciliation of white Americans from the North and South. So even he knew that it's a spiritual issue. The healing in the land can't begin to happen until we take these things down. Councilman Getz, I understand your gesture and your willingness and wanting to compromise, but it will not suffice. There are no statues of any kind of commemorating any kind of SS or Nazis in Germany. My grandfather fought in World War II, and when he came home, he didn't get a GI Bill. And he was fighting for the same freedoms. And to have to see things like that, to send your kids to schools named Dick Dowling, it's a slap in the face. It really is. And I just look at it like, to want to keep something up like that in this day and time, especially for a black person to want to, a black citizen in Beaumont to want to keep a statue up like that, it's equivalent to children of Israel wanting to keep the golden calf. It doesn't make sense. It's a symbol of your former oppressors. And just like some of the rhetoric that was said earlier, that the victim mentality, keeping stuff up like that, it just reminds you that at one time the society here in Beaumont didn't think that I was equal. You know, it needs to go. It needs to be taken down. That's all I have to say. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews.
Caitlin, and I think the last name is Dueller, 1190 Norwood Drive, Beaumont, Texas, item number 6.
Good afternoon. My name is Caitlin Durler, and I have been a resident of Beaumont for 27 years. I am also a local educator and by training an art historian. My experience in the schools in Beaumont, Texas is I was classmates with diverse students, black students, Latino students, as well as has been educated by really great black and Latina teachers here. In my training as an art historian, I've observed national trends towards being more inclusive of diversity, and I think Beaumont and their public art should be more representative of, histories other than Anglo histories. So I, in addition to supporting the statements made previously about removing the statue, I also would like to propose that more funds be allotted to public art in Southeast Texas that accurately represents our diverse population here and our history. I think I just wanted to keep it short and support, like I said, the previous statements made about removing the statue and instead focusing on funding public art that is more representative of my black and Latina neighbors, classmates, and students in my classroom. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Durler.
Judy Nichols, 1520 North 20th Street, Nederland, Texas, item number 6.
Thank you, City Council, for allowing me to address you. I appreciate your time. And while I'm not a citizen of Beaumont, I do business here, and I am a neighbor. So I'd like to bring just put forward a thought, because there's been a lot of discussion about removal. And we all know that when you forget your history, you're doomed to repeat its mistakes. So I would like to suggest that the council consider relocating the statue and putting it in a historical setting with context on why this was not a good thing that the KKK did, and why the Daughters of the Confederacy were wrong to erect this statue and pay for it. And there should not be an obliteration of these historical mistakes, but they should stand to remind us that we dare not repeat them going forward. Just my 2 cents. Thank you, City.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols.
That's all I have, Mayor.
Okay, if there's no other citizen who wishes to speak on one of these items as mentioned before, I will now entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second for approval of the consent agenda. Is there any discussion by council? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. First item, please.
Mayor and Council, item number 1 is an ordinance entitled an ordinance granting a specific use permit to allow a wholesale shrimp company in an LI light industrial district for property located at 5620 Avenue A, City of Beaumont, Jefferson County, Texas. A joint public hearing held on June the 15th. The Planning Commission recommended 7-0 to approve the request with one condition, that being construction plans must meet all requirements by water utilities for water and sanitary sewer services, including any requirements of the city's pretreatment and/or FOG, which stands for Fats, Oils, and Grease program. The administration recommends approval with the same condition.
Thank you. Council, you have heard the reading of item number 1. Is there a motion on this item?
Mayor, I so move to approve with all of the restrictions.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any discussion on this item? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Before we go to item number 2, City Clerk just informed me that there is one more citizen who wanted to speak on item number 6, so we'll allow that at this time.
Jason Marshburn, 1070 Monterey Drive, Beaumont, Texas, item number 6.
Hello, good afternoon. First I want to say I have 2 of my great-great-great-grandfathers that fought for the Confederacy. That's just the way it was, okay? You know, we didn't live their life the way, you know, we don't understand how they came with their decisions. We don't know, you know, they probably don't understand the way we live our life. And so, I mean, to me, they're family, because that's where I came from. Now, as family, we don't always agree on lifestyle. You know, we can always, I got probably every side of the political spectrum of my family, so we don't always agree on the issue. And I understand that the life that was back then was not appropriate now, and it was wrong. And I think my ancestors are looking down on heaven from us and saying the same thing. So, you know, that's why I don't understand how people can look at a statue and see it as intimidating. But, you know, I don't understand it, because to me, that's not my family. You know, that the statue kind of represents my people or my ethnicity or whatever as a Southerner. So I may not understand how the hate, but I can kind of understand a little bit. But you know, just that stuff happened a long time ago. If you did take the statue down, I think I've probably gone to. I mean, I'm not. That's fine. You know, I'm not. If it stays, I'm fine with that too. But I just want to know, it's like, I don't believe it, you know, is hate, and some of the people do the Confederacy is all just about one thing, but it's about changing the economic system. We kind of have that problem today in America, is that, you know, those of us who live in the middle of the country feel like we're shut out by each of the coast. You know, the Northeast dominates the media, and California and New York and those places and Washington seem like they dominate our morals and values here. So we kind of have the same feeling. It's a little different. We think that, you know, our ways of life's better. And they look at us like we're stupid or whatever, as, you know, people who live in the flower country. So it's kind of that same sentiment. We won't return back to what it was in Jim Crow. We won't ever return back to slavery, obviously. And nobody supports that sort of thing. But it's just like, I think it's just about, you know, people feeling like they were shut out and not heard in Washington, D.C. And I think people feel that way today. I'd rather see some more about my ethnicity, which is most of my heritage is Scottish. And so, you know, our people really started the country with Adam Smith and John, you know, all these, the Scottish Enlightenment was probably the most important part of history. And I think we maybe more emphasize that in this country. I think we've gotten lost in our country as far as morals and values personally. And, you know, some of the things that they want to go towards, you know, socialism and Marxism and away from Adam Smith and away from what is right. It feels kind of crazy. I don't want anybody to damage a statue, so sometimes I think it should be taken down and put in a nice museum, just because I don't want any anarchists to come over here. It just kind of scares the bejeebers out of me. But yeah, but that's my 2 thoughts about it.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
Thank you.
Item number 2, please.
Mayor and Council, item number 2 is an ordinance entitled, an ordinance granting a specific use permit to allow a second dwelling on one lot of property in an RS residential single-family dwelling district for property located at 6555 Claiborne Drive in the city of Beaumont, Jefferson County, Texas. At a joint public hearing held on June the 15th, the Planning Commission recommended 7-0 to approve the request with 2 conditions that are listed in your staff memorandum. The administration recommends approval with the same 2 conditions.
Thank you, Council. You've heard the reading of item number 2. Is there a motion on this item, please?
So move for approval.
Second.
Thank you, and I assume that's with the conditions as read?
With the conditions as well.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion and the second, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Item number 3, please.
Item number 3 is an ordinance entitled, an ordinance granting a specific use permit to allow a bar in a GCMD, General Commercial Multiple Family Dwelling District for property located at 39 9th 11th Street, the city of Beaumont, Jefferson County, Texas. A joint public hearing held on June the 15th. The Planning Commission recommended 7-0 to approve the request with 2 conditions stated in your staff memorandum. We also recommend approval with the 2 conditions.
Thank you. Council, you have heard the reading of number 3. Is there a motion on this item?
So move to approve, Mayor.
Thank you.
Second.
There's a motion and a second on the floor. All in
I have
favor?
a question, Mayor.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. It says the property is located at less than 1,000 feet from the 2 school properties. And then you go down to into the sections below. How are we getting around that, Mr. Manager?
They have to notify the state of Texas according to state law, and if they do that, I think they're in compliance. Do you have anything else you could add, Mr. Cooper?
It's a notification to the school that they're within 1,000 feet, and then the school can take it from there to the TABC and protest there.
So, number 2 says, within 1,000 feet of a public school or a private school, if the governing body of the city receives a request from the governing body of the private school or from a board of trustees of the school district under section the education code.
And I don't know that we have. Did we receive anything from the school?
So is it not are we not over that?
To make that decision.
We mean over.
Do we have the authority to make sure that we have that letter, or is that a state issue?
Well, it says if they contact us and notify us that they have an objection to it, then you would react to that. But according to, we have not received any complaint from the school that I'm aware of.
I guess my concern is getting the cart before the horse and letting these people go out and build this property out, and then us being forced to come back and shut it down because the schools don't want it because it's within 1,000 feet. Is my concern. I don't have an issue with it being there, but I just don't want to see somebody.
Adina, if you want to come, please. I'm sorry, but you're on television.
You're a star.
And people are watching.
My understanding is that you would approve it, and then the TABC has to approve it before they can get the liquor license. So in the process of them applying for their license from the TABC, that's what that notification's for. So if the TABC will not issue that license if there's any response from the schools. It's more or less, in our request, making sure that they're aware that's going to be part of their request.
So do we notify the schools that this application is being made?
We notify property owners within 200 feet. For the TABC part, it's 1,000 feet. But they have to come back through the city to get approval for that liquor license as well. So planning will be reviewing that. They would have had to have made those notices, and if we get any response in that process, then we would deny their request for the liquor license.
But in the meantime, we're giving them the authority to go start building out the building.
Yes, but we're making them aware that this is part of it.
So, in other words, the TABC has to send out those notices. Yeah.
Well,
or let them know.
Right.
And one of your conditions would be that they notify the school that they've applied for the TABC license.
And that's in here too?
And that's,
Yeah.
That's listed in here? Okay, thank you.
Yes. Councilman Getz?
What are the two schools that are within 1,000 feet? I think one of them may be the former BISD Central campus.
Yes, that's one of them, and I can't remember exactly where the other one is.
I believe there's a charter school.
There was a charter school, I believe it's still there, it's within 1,000 feet.
Is that charter school still operational, active?
I'm not sure, but if they still own it, I think it still applies.
I don't think it's operating.
So there might not be any operation in either of these.
And that's the reason we did state that if there are any schools owned within the 1,000 feet.
Right, so it might be a moot point because...
Even if the school owns the property, so the property
Sure,
that BISD does apply.
Right,
So-
okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything else, council? Okay, there's a motion and a second on the floor, and that motion did include the conditions, correct? Who made that motion?
With the conditions.
You were good. Okay, all right, thank you. So there's a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries also unanimously. Next item, please.
Mayor and Council, item number 4 is to consider resolution authorizing the city manager to execute change order number 2, accept maintenance, and authorize a final payment to Alco LLC. Back in July of 2019, the City Council awarded a contract to Alco in the amount of $1,416,203 for the 11th Street project, and that was that overlay from I-10 to Delaware. The proposed change order number 2 is a reduction of $52,472.84. It's required to adjust the estimated quantities in the contract to reflect the actual quantities used in the completion of the project. The project has been inspected by the engineering division and found to be complete in accordance with the provisions and terms set forth in the contract. Acceptance of change order number 2, maintenance, and a final payment in the amount of $375,019.85 is recommended.
Thank you. Council, you have heard the reading of number 4. Is there a motion on this item?
Make a motion to approve.
Thank you. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any discussion by council? If not, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Next item, please.
Item number 5 is to consider a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute change order number 2, accept maintenance, and authorize a final payment to PM Construction and Rehab LLC, doing business as IPR South Central. In March of 2019, the City Council awarded a contract to IPR South Central in the amount of $1,812,920 for a pipe bursting work order contract, internally referred to as Phase 2 project. Proposed change order number 2 is a reduction of $335,677.94, required to adjust, again, the estimated quantities in the contract to reflect the actual quantities used. This work It was a work order contract without areas being pre-selected, and the amount of work that could be accomplished in the time period was overestimated, and time ran out before the amounts of the contract were reached. We recently awarded a new work order contract and have adjusted our estimates of work to better fit the contract time period. This particular project has been inspected by Water Utilities, found to be complete in accordance with the provisions and terms of the contract. So acceptance of change order number 2, maintenance and final payment in the amount of $73,831.30 is recommended.
Thank you. Counselor, is there a motion on this item?
Make a motion to approve.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second for approval on this item. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Next item, please.
Mayor and Council, item number 6 is to consider a resolution to remove and store the statue located at Weiss Park. And this item was placed on the agenda at the request of council members Samuel and Felshaw.
Thank you. Council, you have heard the reading of item number 6. Is there a motion on this item?
I so move for
Second.
approval.
Second.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor and a second. Discussion?
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Got a kind of a prepared statement here. I believe that there is value in future generations being able to learn from the mistakes of our past. As Sir Winston Churchill said, those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. Therefore, I cannot support the current resolution without trying to help negotiate a compromise between those that would like the statue removed and those that would prefer it remained untouched. I propose to change the wording of the resolution to that the city manager is hereby authorized to remove the statue located at Wise Park in the city of Beaumont using professional services to remove and protect the integrity of the statue. Once removed, the statue will be sold to the highest bidder or donated to a museum.
Okay. So, if this is acceptable by the motion and the second, do we have to look at this motion, or if it's acceptable first, I'll say? So just how do I proceed?
You have a motion and a second on the floor
So I gotta
that has to be
entertain
dealt
that
with
first. Okay,
before
okay.
a substitute or another motion is made.
Okay, so before I move on, is there any discussion?
Is it, I
You're
think,
this- Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I think it's possible as an addendum to this motion so that we could vote on it all at once.
That would be how you would deal with your first motion, to accept.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
So I'm asking if you...
I am not amending my motion.
Okay. Are you good with the second, Councilman Pate?
I seconded the motion for discussion.
Okay, discuss. Go ahead. Did you have something?
Well, the point that Councilmember Neal brought up, I think we do want to put this in a historical perspective. And we didn't have anything to do with the women and the daughters of the Confederacy that donated this to the city. I think at this particular point in time, it's not an appropriate monument, and I belong to the Army that won. I take a lot of pride in the fact that as a retired Army colonel, I know what we usually did with the guys that lost, as is evidenced by the fact that not what somebody said, but what President Lincoln's whole approach was to bring them back like prodigal sons and allow them to become part of the United States of America, which is what happened. I don't think we need to honor those individuals for what they did, as was pointed out. The people that did this don't represent us today, without a doubt, by any stretch of the imagination. But I think one of the things that we need to look at and should look at is the approach that the President of the United States, who signed the Emancipation Proclamation, his attitude toward those that took the wrong turn and said, look, you made a mistake, you lost, but we're going to bring you back in. But we don't need to make them heroes. Now, a little history, a whole lot of those folks that fought on the side of the losing side, the Confederacy, joined the United States Army later. Matter of fact, several generals served during the Spanish-American War. One of them was even General Lee's nephew and the grandson of General Henry Light Horse Harry Lee. They pledged allegiance back to the United States of America. We need to remember that they were American citizens. They turned their back, and then President Lincoln said, we want you back in. That's why that war was fought, to keep the Union together. And he was successful. And like I said, my side won. But what we need to do is appreciate the fact that the people that put these monuments up, these weren't people like David Cargill and that particular piece of artwork there. It wasn't the right thing to do. And I think we should remove it, but I think we should remove it, and I concur with Councilmember Neal, take it out of Wise Park, and dispose of it appropriately. There may be somebody that wants it. I don't think the city of Beaumont does. This is not a statue of U.S. Grant. This is not a statue of any of the presidents. It's simply a statue of a Confederate soldier. And none of us agree with what was written underneath. But we need to move forward, move it away, and move on. And, you know, Jesus said, Lord, forgive me like I forgive other people. We need to forgive those people that did repent and turn back to the good side and move on. And we need to take care of this particular monument, move it away. There might be somebody who does want it. I don't think we can give it away, Tyrone, because it belongs to the city, and they'd have to pay us something. Since we can't gift anything from the city, we've talked about that over and over again, unless there's some clarification you could give.
The city does have a surplus property policy.
Okay.
Anything of value less than $2,500 can be disposed of on the manager's signature.
Okay. Well, see, thanks for the clarification, because usually we want to make sure that we're not giving city services for free. That's usually the discussion we have. That's it, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I think Councilmember Getz, let me just clarify where I'm going here. It sounds like that Councilmember PATE is not going to second the motion that's on the floor based on what he just said, correct?
Yeah, I second it for discussion.
Understand, but I'm asking that question. Right. Okay, so we don't have Robert's Rules of Order. I'm being told that Robert's Rules of Order allows Councilman Neal to amend the motion, but we did not adopt Robert's Rules of Order. We adopted our own. So before we go to more discussion, I'd like to have a second on that motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, please, Councilman Getz.
Thank you. Two of the speakers that addressed council today admonished us to be on the right side of history. There is no right side of history. There's no wrong side of history. History is just that. It is history. That monument was erected, and I'm going to agree with Mr. Williams on this, was erected as a glorification to the Confederacy. You look at the inscription on the base, there's no way that you cannot conclude that that was the reason that that monument was erected. The language on that base is offensive to me. When it talks about in terms of a cause that was just, I again agree with Mr. Williams that the cause was the issue of slavery. Anybody that reads the Articles of Succession would have to come to that conclusion. And I understand there's arguments out there about states' rights and the War of Northern Aggression and all of that. There's talk about how, well, it wasn't slavery, it was an economic issue, but those are one and the same because the South built their economy on the backs of slaves. Slavery was wrong, it's evil. It's an abomination. Nobody should be able to support that. I can't imagine anybody would. I don't. Now, having said all that, the spirit of compromise is something that we have lost in this country. And Councilmember Samuel and I sat down 3 years ago, and I thought we had a compromise worked out, and moved this statue over to Pipkin Park, where the Temple of the Brave is. I don't doubt that the Beaumont boys that went and fought in the Civil War were brave. A lot of them died, but it was not for a just cause. That monument was put up not just to glorify the Confederacy, but as a memorial to Beaumont boys. They got killed in the Civil War. Do we just discard that, put that aside, not think about that? I have a problem with that aspect of it. And for that reason, I tried to craft something that would be a compromise and understanding clearly I am not about glorifying the Confederacy or their cause. You're not going to find any stars and bars at my house. But the language that I put, and I've given everybody a copy of it, and this is a proposal, much like Councilmember Neal has a proposal, that we consider changing the language on the pedestal as follows. The American Civil War was fought because the leaders of 13 states wanted to maintain the institution of slavery and subjugate their fellow man, specifically black men, women, and children, to the atrocities of human bondage. Between 1861 and 1865, nearly 700,000 American lives were lost in the war between the states, more than the combined total of every other war that the United States of America has ever been involved in. This statue depicts an anonymous Confederate soldier in the typical uniform of that period. It was erected in October 1912 by the Albert Sidney Johnston Camp, number 75 UCB, and the citizens of Beaumont. The statue was erected to glorify the Confederacy and to memorialize citizens from Beaumont that lost their lives in the battle. Through the prism of history, in June 2020, the Beaumont City Council formally recognized that the cause of the Confederacy was not just. But rather than remove this statue from public display, to rededicate it as a solemn reminder of the need for Americans to come together for the common cause of their community and their country. I would put that on one side of the statue. The other side of the statue, where it's now got a cross Texas flag and a Confederate flag, I would put, united we stand, divided we fall, the seal of the United States of America, and E Pluribus Unum, which is a motto of the United States, which means from out of many, one. Now, that's a proposal that I would like to make. I don't think there's going to be 4 people up here that are going to support that, but I'd like to see if there is, and if there's not, then we can move on to the discussion as to what should happen to that statue. And I will tell you that something's got to be done with that statue. It can't just sit there in its current state, especially with the words on the base. But that is my proposal, Mayor, is to try to modify the language on the statute so that it can serve as an educational purpose. My gosh, you can talk to a lot of kids today. They don't even know where Gettysburg is or what it was. We need to be able to educate our children. And people say, well, that's what schools are for. Yes, it's great to learn that in schools, but it's not the same from experiencing something. I went to Gettysburg for the first time earlier this year. There's statues there to the Union. There's statues there to the Confederacy. It's hallowed ground. What, over 50,000 people lost their lives in the span of 3 days? It's the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. Let me tell you what, it stops and makes you think. You can read about Gettysburg in the classroom, but walking those grounds, that's a whole nother thing. History needs to be not just left in the textbooks, but made available for people to understand and see and get a feel for what it was really all about.
Thank you. So can I, Mr. Cooper, our surplus policy in the city of Beaumont does it not allow for sale or donation of surplus property?
It does allow for the sale.
Okay.
But it doesn't require city council action. It just authorizes the city manager to dispose
that
of property
doesn't-
with a
yeah,
value
okay.
of less than $2,500.
Thank you very much.
One potential pitfall about selling it is, we might sell it for $1, but the cost of dismantling that statue and removing that statue, when we talked about moving it to Pipkin Park, Mr. Manager, we had worked up some estimates of costs, I believe. Do you have those available, and you can let us know what those costs might be and whose responsibility would it be to pay for those costs?
The estimate for us to do it and utilize a private contractor is roughly, it's just an estimate, it's $15,000.
And that would do what exactly?
Take it all down, including that granite base, take it all down and store it in one of our facilities.
So it would be, if there's a vote here today to remove it, it would cost us $15,000 potentially, and then it will be stored in a warehouse until when?
Well, that's not up to me. Meaning y'all haven't even voted yet. So if you vote to remove it, we'll start immediately to take it down. We'll store it, and then I think one of you ought to take the lead and try to find an appropriate place that you can bring back to your fellow council members and get them to approve it.
And and I understand we haven't even voted yet, but part of considering how you vote needs to be able to look ahead to see what the path is forward, okay? So let's assume there's a vote to take it down. The city dismantles it, spends $15,000 on it to take it down. It's stored in a warehouse, and someone comes and says, I'll take it. How's it going to be determined what the value is that we sell it for? Are we going to auction, or how's that going to work?
I'm going to bring that back to y'all and let you decide.
But typically, when that happens, if there's something in surplus, y'all don't bring it back to us. It's just
No, ma'am, but
because-
this is very different.
Right.
And
But I'm just clarifying.
I'll tell you that I'm not going to make that decision. You will make that decision at the appropriate time.
So, continuing on, what I'm hearing from you is that should someone emerge saying, I want it, I want it for my backyard, or I want it for target practice, you'll bring those back to us, and then we'll have to decide if that's someone we want to sell it to, and well, I guess we can consider what the purposes is they wanted, and then would it be up to them to pay to incur the expense of coming and getting it?
That would
gonna
be
be
up
up to
to
y'all.
us too. What the city manager is saying is typically surplus property, the decision's made by the staff. But because of the nature of this, he's going to bring it back to us. So if someone comes and says, I want to give $1, but I'll pay to move it, then we would have to he'd bring that to us and would make a decision. And anyone can solicit that.
Okay, I've got a couple more.
Just one
Gabrielle.
second.
Take your time.
Okay.
And we do have one more citizen that wants to speak. I think the box was inadvertently checked wrong, so I'm going to allow that before we vote, but y'all can move forward with your comments. I just
Okay.
want to acknowledge that.
Okay. Yeah, and again, I'm just trying to think down the road here, Mr. Hayes. So you're going to bring it back if somebody indicates an interest. Would we have the legal ability, this is a Mr. Cooper question, would we have the legal ability to pay for the cost of trucking it out of here and reassembling it for somebody? Is if the council blesses that, is that something we can do?
I've not thought about this past council's action on this item today. I would think that would be something that the council would want to talk about, but I don't think that would be something that the manager would recommend. I wouldn't recommend it legally, but you would draft whatever procedure it is in conveying that property to whoever you convey it to. I would sell it and they take it off however they choose to take it off.
And I understand you might not have thought about it past what is on here today, but because it has a bearing on how I may vote, I would like to know if legally we have the ability to convey what I would believe would be a gift. I guess you could say, well, if there's a public purpose for it, do we have the legal authority to make a decision to pay for the costs of someone having to take it away from here and reassemble it for them? Can that even legally be done?
I would think once you consummate your conveyance, that you no longer have any responsibility to it at all.
As a term of that conveyance, can we do that?
I'm sorry?
As a term of the conveyance, as part of the consideration?
If you include that as part of the sales price, yes.
So we could do whatever we wanted to do. You could sell it for $1.
Right.
I mean, and you could not pay or pay, but the council will have to vote on that, and I tend to agree with the manager and with the city attorney. I wouldn't be willing to pay to move it and set it back up, but that's just me. So I think before you put those things out there that, my opinion is before you put those things out there that could happen, we don't know because the council would have to vote on it.
Well, I understand, but I just...
someone come forward and say, I want to buy it and I want you to pay to move it, and then council would have to vote on that.
Right, and I'm just trying to cover the bases here because, suppose there is a vote today to take it down and it's put in a warehouse and someone emerges and says, well, I'll buy it, I'll give you $1 for it, but I don't have the money to come get it and put it back together, so I'd need y'all to do that for me.
Then the council would need to vote on that.
And the council, and that covered my question. I think legally we can do it, but it sounds like it wouldn't be recommended by the city manager, the city attorney, and yourself. Okay.
Yes, Councilman Pate.
Okay, I'd like to go back to the motion that Audwin made, and that is to store it. And then I think it would be appropriate to entertain any additional motion that Councilmember Neal may have, since we're not amending his motion.
I understand, but do you have any discussion?
That's my that's the point I'm making. If I support storing it, we vote to store it. That's the point I'm making. We vote to store it, then it would open it up for any additional motions on what to do with it after it's been stored, correct? That's correct. All right, then I'd move that we vote.
Wait, we already have a motion and a second on the floor. I had asked for a vote, but you asked for discussion. That's why you made the second. So let's make sure there's no other discussion
Yeah.
before we move on to a vote,
I have another
okay?
question, Mayor.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
So, thank you, Mayor. So you're saying after this vote, we can make another motion and vote
To what
again?
we're going to do with it, but I don't even
doesn't
see
make
how
sense to me.
that would make sense because we don't know what anybody's going to want, or I think that's for another time, my opinion. But if that's what the council member wants to put forward, then I guess he can do that.
Well, when we vote, excuse me just a second.
There is a motion and a second on the floor, and we're going to vote on that motion as it was read,
To store it.
basically. Yes, sir. You made the motion.
There is a motion on the floor.
Yes.
That motion is to remove the statue, place it in storage until there's another decision as to what shall be done.
That's my point.
That was the motion, that was the second. We were now open to other discussions. You have something else, Mr. Attorney?
You have one action item before you today,
Right. We can't.
That's,
to remove and store.
I understand that. Now is the time for discussion on the motion and second that's on the floor.
Yes.
Exactly.
Mayor,
So.
I think
Basically, though, let me just please, okay, so we cannot vote on this motion and then talk about what we're going to do with it. It's not an action item. We could talk about it, I guess, but we can't make any decision. So I think we move forward with, I mean, we've talked about it. We've made other suggestions. The motion is standing as it was made, and as soon as you make your comment, I'm going to ask for a vote. Okay, everyone?
I got another
All right.
comment too.
okay. Well, as a formality, and I'm certain I already know the answer to this, but I will ask Councilmember Samuel if he would accept as an amendment to his motion to incorporate the language that I have suggested on the base of the memorial and leave it as is.
Councilman, you're not going to amend your motion, as you said earlier, or are you?
I thought this was discussion for everyone.
Yeah,
No,
he was asking you a
I'm not going to even
question.
entertain that question,
Okay,
so we can move on with
the
our
motion
discussion.
is as it stands. Next.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I was told that the reason that the wording on this ordinance was so just one line was because it was a rush deal Friday. So this whole thing is just becoming a scam whenever the intentions all along were to do it. I'm simply asking to put on the ordinance. I don't understand why you can't change, I don't understand why you can't add one sentence to a resolution to clearly state that we're gonna have it professionally taken down and try to donate it or sell it or give it to a nonprofit or do something different with it rather than sitting in the back of a warehouse and just ruin it.
We can do something with it.
No, I'm being told we can't.
Well, no,
Mayor,
not today.
Any ordinance or resolution that's brought to the council on any Tuesday is merely a recommendation for language. And it's up to the council, however you decide to make your motion, second your motion, and take your vote, we will go back and amend the resolution, amend the order based upon the motion and
that
second and
all the
vote
time.
that's taken. As I stand here, the motion has been made as to the resolution that's before you. It's been seconded. He's not been willing to amend it.
So we need to vote on this
On that motion.
This is a question for the city attorney. In order to get my proposal before the city council, is it necessary that Councilmember Samuel agree to amend it, or can other council members say, you know, I like that language and I would agree to that, and change, as you just said, change the language in the resolution to reflect the action of council?
My understanding of procedural processes, and you've not adopted Robert's Rules of Order, the maker of the motion would have to accept any amendment to his motion and the second.
Okay, so there's no way
Okay, just
that
a
my
minute.
language can be considered as long as this motion is on the floor, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, go. What do you?
Before you go, this is to you. If we vote on this motion by Odwin and it fails, and Councilmember Neal comes up with, we're going to store it and see what we can do about selling it, Is that appropriate?
Yes.
If a motion fails, you can put anything else back on the floor.
Okay.
Mayor, I'm sorry. It was my understanding, though, what you just said, that we can vote on this, and we can vote on it in keeping with the spirit of what's been spoken. Audwin has his motion to remove the statue and put it in storage. Taylor is asking that we just maintain it, we protect it until such time we're able to sell and or donate it. We can't vote on that within that spirit of what was just said?
Not unless he amends his motion, because that's not in there. In the future, if we have that availability, then it could come back to us and we could vote on it.
But if the motion on the floor fails, then I can make a motion on what I just proposed today.
That's correct. That's
Is
why
that
we're
correct?
rushing to put some on the agenda.
The motion, as I understand it, and the resolution as it's before you, does not speak to how the statute is to be cared for. And I don't think it's anybody's understanding that it's going to be destroyed.
No.
But I would,
It is going to be properly cared for, stored appropriately until the council decides what you want to do with it.
Well, then can Councilman Neal come back next Tuesday with an agenda item just stating that we want to make sure that we care for the statue until such time we're able to sell or donate to a museum?
Yes.
why can't we do it
Can
today?
you do it today?
No, it's not an action item today unless it fails.
Exactly.
If it fails, can he do it today?
If it
Yes.
fails, you can
You can do
consider
any
a different
motion you want if
motion.
it fails. Or it can come back next week if another council member seconds it, just like happened today.
Two things, Mayor. One, if it passes today, he could still come back next week and do
Yes.
the same thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay?
I think it's,
All right, if everybody, and we do have a surplus policy that we will follow if it doesn't. Okay? All right, there is a motion. and a
Mayor, you were going to let
Oh,
someone
I'm so
speak
sorry.
before the
Yes.
motion?
I'm just trying to get to a vote.
I know, I just don't want you
All
to
right.
forget about him.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, his name is David Morgan, 3108 Yeomans, Nederland, Texas.
I apologize for being so late and bringing this back up, but this
Well,
issue.
as I understand it, you did, you just didn't have
I
the right
checked the
thing
wrong
checked.
box,
Okay,
yes.
all right. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to come late and speak. But go ahead,
Basically,
please.
removing this statue is like putting a Band-Aid on an amputated limb. If we take this statue down, we've got to remove the Dick Dowling statue, we've got to remove the Marabou and change the name of the college, Lamar. He was one of the biggest racists in Texas. And it's a proven fact in the WT Block history of Texas. I've got it on my Facebook page. We need to bulldoze the Civil War battlement in Sabine Pass. We need, if we're going to eradicate history, we need to eradicate everything and start over. If it has to do with, well, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, George Washington owned slaves, Benjamin Franklin owned slaves, but we're going to keep those statues. We got to take this one down. So like I said, it's like putting a Band-Aid on an amputated limb. I would be willing to purchase this thing for $1.37 scrap bronze price. I do have access to professional construction workers who build refineries for a living and could take this thing down safely with the use of their equipment. I think the statue can be repurposed, if not melted down and made into a different design, which I also have an idea for, which the art people down here on the other Pearl Street have a whole studio of artists that can come up with an idea. But just to remove one statue is not going to fix the problem in Beaumont. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Okay, there's a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor of...
Madam Mayor,
Sure.
I asked to speak, but was cut off.
Oh, okay, go ahead, please.
Now, my motion was simply to remove a statue that has been shown to be offensive to many people. That was to be done as we have the ability to move many things. We've moved things in the city before. We moved statue even over to the art museum. Now, I don't know what type of procedure somebody's talking about proposing to ensure that it's not damaged. Our city employees are employees that have the ability to move the statue, and should there be problems with that, then whomever is in charge of moving it, they would have to address that. Isn't that right, Mr. Manager?
Well, if we hire an outside contractor to help us, I think they'll provide insurance coverage.
So that should not be a problem. And the motion was to put it in storage until another site was found. Now, as Councilmember Getz mentioned 3 years ago, he wanted to come up with an alternate proposal or negotiate something. At that time, he proposed to me to put this over with the Temple of the Brave, those individuals who fought in the American Revolution, fighting against the British. Those were soldiers of honor that fought for this country. That is totally different from soldiers of treason to fight against this country. To redirect or restructure that statue, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many, that wouldn't change what the statue is. As somebody said, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. So, your proposal, as I told you then, was not acceptable.
That's not
acceptable. It's not acceptable then, it's not acceptable now. What that statute says is separation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. That's a reveille for those who believe that principle is fair and just. The candidate running for president, Strong Thurmond, brought back that Confederate spirit. And that's when we began to see the groundswell of the statues that were being erected for honoring Confederate soldiers. You say heritage, some say hate. You say culture, some say slavery. You can put whatever you want on that statue, it's not going to change the statue. What I see are black men hanging in trees, and that was okay. And you sit here and try and justify.
Mayor, I'm going to call a point of order because I have not tried to justify. I've called a point of order.
I gave you the opportunity to say what you had to say.
All right, wait.
Point of
wait,
order.
wait.
I'm not going to sit here and let him try to say I'm justifying that
I'm going to
statue.
call for a recess, 10 minutes. We're going to recess. Go separate ways, please. Go separate ways, cool off.